Hello, everybody. I'm Isaac. I am here with Lane. We are going to be talking about boot.dev and how boot.dev has used AI to enhance their product. Their product is a way to learn coding. And I think this is pretty interesting because, in my opinion, a good way that everybody should code is in a way that lets them learn more about coding as they go. There's I think sometimes this idea that you learn to code and then you go code. And I think it should be kind of the other way around. You learn to code so that you can code and learn more coding. And I brought Lane on because I took the backend developer curriculum. I'd had a background in data science and machine learning. I wanted to expand and learn how to take what I'm doing and actually ship it in commercial products, build it into things, and be more full stack. And I took the boot.dev curriculum. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I learned a lot from it and grew a lot. I stayed in the community because it was a good community. They have a great Discord community. I hung around there for a while. And over time, I decided I wanted to be a teacher too. So I'd always taught prior to data science. My career was as a teacher. I was a ballroom dance teacher, so a little bit different than what I'm doing now. And I reached out to Lane to get started. So I'm working on a course on RAG for boot.dev. That's one course that I'm doing. This talk is focused around AI for coding, how to use AI for coding. And Lane agreed to kind of come on and talk and share some of his experiences. So that's what we're doing here today. That's why Lane's here. Lane, do you want to start and tell us a little bit more about boot.dev? Kind of what it is, like what problem is it solving?
Yeah, for sure. I'll keep it quick. I don't want this to just sound like an ad for my thing, but uh, just so that everyone can understand kind of the context of the discussion, and then I swear we'll get to some technical AI talk. But yeah, it's a curriculum where you learn backend development. So you're learning languages like Python and Go, and it's primarily done in the browser, where you're coding in the browser, and then as you're writing code, we've got this built-in AI chatbot that has kind of full context about what you're working on, right? So you can see the state of your code editor, you can see the state of like the output window. And we're actually in the middle of working on a big new feature where that context window that the AI has access to is much larger. So it gives kind of the AI a much more personalized view into like holistically what has the student been doing on the platform, like what past lessons did they struggle with, what are past conversations the students had with the AI that have helped them get unstuck. We're like aggregating things like mastery scores around certain topics, and it's been really interesting to see how, I mean, just giving the right context to the LLM is like all the work. That's basically everything. And once you get the right context to the LLM, like all of a sudden, the chat feels fantastic, right? Like you're getting exactly what you want out of it. But without all of that context, you know, you get the comments like, it's just a dumb robot giving me AI slop. Um, so I think it'll be really fun to talk about kind of that context engineering piece today.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's true in sometimes it's thought of like, oh, well, let's just give it context. In some cases, it's a prompt. In some cases, it's like, how do you retrieve the relevant content? Because you can't always, like, ideally it'd be great. Let's just dump 300 textbooks into a big prompt, and it doesn't work that way. And so, how do you pick it? How do you retrieve it? And then it also gets into like tools, like agentic things, like what kind of information about tools does it need to be able to call stuff? So, so AI can be used to code and to learn coding. So, I want to talk a little bit about that context because I do think that's really interesting. So, I guess how have you gone about picking what should be in context, what shouldn't be in context? It seems, for example, if like, hey, I'm gonna have a chat bot on this particular lesson, it seems obvious, well, I should have that lesson in context. um,
Yes.
but like, what beyond that, like, how do you go about saying like this is going to be important versus that's not going to be important, and what's that look like?
Well, to start at the beginning, like it's funny you say that. It should be obvious the lessons in context, but like when GPT-4 first came out, right? Like like OpenAI's ChatGPT was released, and then very shortly after the API was made available, we almost instantly integrated it with boot.dev. Like we were one of the first products to get the API into the product and give people a chatbot alongside like their coding lesson. And we didn't do any of that. Like it really was just like, here's a model. In fact, it was like 3.5 turbo at the time. And like, good luck. I guess copy paste like what you want it to know about into the chat, right? And that's how people were originally using ChatGPT to code too, right? It was just copy pasting snippets of text from your editor into the chatbot. Um, Over the last 2 years, things have gotten a lot more sophisticated. So fairly quickly, within months, it was like, okay, we're going to add the lesson to the context window. Then it was, okay, we're going to add the student's code. And really, like the main thing that's been like the trade-off in everything that we've done is exactly what you said at the beginning of the call, which is trying to fit everything into the context window. And in the early days, there was actually like a hard limit on how much context you could give to the LLM. Like it was pretty restrictive. GPT-4, I want to say it was like 8,000 tokens, which, I mean, it's a good amount, but when you think about it as like that's all you can fit into the entire conversation, it's like, oh crap, that actually fills up pretty quick if you're just like dumping code files in there. Luckily, context windows are much bigger now, but it's not like you'd get that for free. First of all, it's going to take longer when you fill up that entire context window. It's going to cost you more when you fill up that entire context window. And in most cases, it actually makes the results worse. Like you really do just want to give it kind of the minimum amount of relevant information, because then it like, attention is all you need. The attention is focused on the thing that you believe is important for the LLM to like quote unquote think about as it's giving answers to the student. So that's been like the whole goal is just like, how do we take all this information that we have in markdown files in the student's editor in our database as like, raw records in a SQL database, and do some sort of aggregation step before the conversation starts. And that's been historically. And then of course we could talk about like tool calls and stuff that we've added as well.
So you mentioned you started with just a chat bot, and then you added the lesson contents, and now you're adding kind of more and more information and aggregating stuff. How do you, when you add stuff, you mentioned that as you added some stuff, sometimes the performance gets worse if you added too much stuff. So how do you go about thinking? Do you just come up with an idea and then ship it? Do you do A/B tests? Do you how do you decide if you made things better or worse, I guess?
Yeah, I'd like to say that we've been more sophisticated than we actually have been. My gut is that this is how basically all companies in production operate as well, especially when you're smaller like we are. For context, we're a team of 12 people total. Our engineering team is 6. Um, what we've done quantitatively so far is we have up down, like thumbs up thumbs down on every message, and then we record. For now, actually, all we've really recorded is which model we're using. So we've used that to kind of try to figure out like, is GPT 4.1 better for these types of lessons versus like Claude Sonnet 4? And we're really just looking at the number of thumbs up, thumbs downs that we're getting from students. That's been useful. But frankly, the more useful feedback has been qualitative, right? Because students, we have a super active Discord community. And when students are getting weird or unhelpful responses from Boots, they'll paste a link to the conversation into the Discord, and then we just go investigate. And it's surprising how many great improvements you can make, literally just like looking at a specific example and then adding like a 1 sentence negative example to the system prompt or something like that, right? You're like constantly refining the system prompt to take into account like the common positive examples and the common negative examples. And we've done a lot of fine tuning that way. So I'd say that's been the primary thing historically. And there's a bunch of stuff that we're going to have to do for this kind of new AI feature that we're shipping in the next month that I can also get into in a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's great. So I know it doesn't sound necessarily the most sophisticated, but this is actually kind of the foundation that if anyone's aware of Hamel's course on AI evals, it's a huge course. You should go look it up. It's also on Maven. Those are kind of the first and like the most important things. Is that I think what a lot of times people get wrong when they're implementing this is they think I'm going to create a metric, and if that metric goes up, things are good, and if it goes down, it's bad. But there's really no metric that can actually replace I'm gonna get information from the users. If you can get that information directly from them pasting into the chat because you've built some trust up, that's the best. But you also have to just like go look. We don't have like an objective metric that can say, is this English text good or bad? We can try and come up with that. Thumbs up and thumbs down is great. Those are really helpful because if you tell people rate things on like a 1 to 5 scale, it's like, well, what does 3 mean? Like, what does 2 mean versus 3? Like, it depends on who pushes the button. Depends on what mood they're in. Depends on how many times they've done this. And so I actually think that's great. Looking through all of the traces and diving in is kind of the number one thing that I think you should do. And Hamel's course talks about that quite a bit as well. So before we get into that new feature, so we've talked a lot about kind of slowly iterating on the prompt, adding information into context, how important that is, negative examples, putting, I guess you call this like one-shot prompting or whatever, if you want to use a fancy term, but basically just putting examples into the prompt is really helpful. But you also mentioned that you play around with different models. Like how impactful have you found, changing the different models? Do you think like using the same model for everything works, or do you fine tune it? Like obviously if you're like, hey, I'm going to use a cheap model and then I'm going to use a 10 times more expensive model, the more expensive model might be better. But I mean, like comparing these some of these models, how valuable has that effort been versus like engineering the prompt?
Yeah, surprising to no one, 4.1 outperforms 3.5 turbo. So we've basically just completely trusted the providers on like which is the best like general purpose coding model that they offer, right? So like we're on 4.1 for OpenAI, we're on Claude Sonnet 4 for Anthropic. And interestingly, we're not on Gemini 2.5 Pro at the moment. We're on 2.5 Flash, 2.5 Flash. There's the model naming is so that's a whole nother thing. But we're on 2.5 Flash at the moment. And 2.5 Flash is the cheapest by far. It also has the lowest performance. Like we get the most negative like thumbs downs on those. At the moment, we're literally just every time you open a chat with Boots, we're randomly selecting one of those 3 models. So we can collect data on it. And in theory, what we'll eventually do is kind of figure out, what models we want to use for certain things based on like performance and cost and stuff. And like we always kind of knew that 2.5 Flash wouldn't be as good as Claude Sonnet 4 at coding tasks, but it is like way cheaper, right? That's just chatting with Boots when you're in a lesson. And I don't know exactly to what extent we're going to keep around the whole like you can switch between the 3 models. We might end up just kind of picking one that seems to be working after we have all this data on like thumbs ups and thumbs downs. Granted, every time they release a new model, we got to run the whole thing again. But this new feature that we're working on, and I'll just kind of like spill the beans so we can finally talk about it. It's this idea of like infinite practice. So boot dev courses are handwritten, right? Isaac's handwriting one right now. It takes a long time to create a really great course. You can't just like AI generate this stuff. It's really hard to make.
I was like,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
I could just do this, but it takes a lot of work. Yes.
And then I ripped it to shreds in the editing. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to do that. and get any like reasonable results at all. It's obvious that this was not written by a human. It's, you know, it misses a lot of nuance and personal experience, things like that. So our courses are handwritten and will continue to be handwritten for a long time, I think. Um, but at any given point in the curriculum, you want to practice. And historically, we just haven't been able to do a good job at this. Like, yeah, I can make 3 practice lessons per chapter or something like that, but some students need a lot more than 3, you know, practice challenges, and some students don't need any. And you know, you can spend a lot of time just building practice challenges for a given concept, um, when you could be building new courses. So this is where we've seen like a lot of real promise with AI generated challenges where we can take, you know, 50 challenges that we've handmade for our system, tell the AI exactly what the student is struggling with at this moment, and say, you know, generate me a challenge based on this topic at this level of difficulty, and get really good results. And there's a lot, that's a multi-step process. There's some tool calling that's happening there, but that's where I think we're really going to end up breaking down like, okay, you know, we're going to use Claude Sonnet 4 to generate the final coding challenge because it really excels at that. But selecting the topic, you know, we're going to use Gemini Flash 2.5 because it's cheap and we just need to get all this context in there and then condense, like have multiple condensing steps before we get to the actual final kind of generation step. So that's what we're like in the middle of figuring out right now.
That's great. And I think there's a lot of parallels to like a trick that I use when I'm doing AI coding a lot. When I'm working on something and I don't understand the code, maybe I don't understand the documentation or the doc string, or maybe it's just not there. Asking one of these models to say, can you create an example, like a realistic example of how this function or this class would be used in this thing, you can get a lot of like realistic examples of it, or you can get a lot of, you know, instead of practice problems, it's like, hey, you show me an example of how this is used, and creating that kind of stuff is really helpful. So I think you can create these challenges as a educational thing, as in a problem to solve type thing, but also kind of as examples to understand a code base, you know, better and a lot quicker. So it's kind of interesting to see the parallels there.
Yeah, and it's really cool to think about what you can do once you're no longer working in like a one-shot world. Um, for example, like we've sat down as like authors on boot.dev and be like, hey, Claude, give me a challenge for lists in Python, and like we provide it no examples and just like do it. And it gives us like something terrible that we can't use, right? And it's like, okay, well, but if we give it 50 examples of our lessons, now how does it do? It does a lot better. Um, but now what happens if we tell it exactly what concepts it can't use because the student hasn't learned those yet, right? It's like, okay, now it's a lot better, right? And that iteration is what gets us really excited, especially like when you consider the fact that we're generating these challenges and storing them in the cloud. It's like, okay, now we can let the students like rate those challenges after they take them. And we can add the most poorly rated ones with like a note as, you know, dynamic negative examples to the system prompts, the highest rated ones as positive examples. And, you know, again, we're in the middle of building this right now, but we're pretty confident based on our early results in testing that this is going to work if we get the right context.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. So do you when you work on this context, do you find, or have you been finding that you just kind of create examples of good challenges in general, or have you been trying to say, well, I've generated a whole bunch of examples about lists because lists is something you probably want to learn about at some point in any language. And so when I'm asking for problems about lists, I'm going to use kind of a prompt particularly for lists. And then when I'm working on loops, I'll do one for loops. Like how granular do you get? Is it like kind of down to the lesson level or the topic level? Or, you know, if you're doing something in Go or TypeScript, you may not want Python examples, I guess, or does it matter? How have you found that matters?
I found it definitely matters. And this really kind of touches on a larger point, which is, I mean, we've all heard like the doomers out there, like AI is here, there's no more work for humans to do, right? Um, That has absolutely not been our experience so far. In fact, we seem to have a lot of work to do to like get these AI systems up and running and, the quality to the level that we expect, building all sorts of, like I said, sophisticated observability and kind of telemetry around the system. So there's a lot of stuff to do here. And yeah, people, you have kind of the AI doomers, the AI has solved everything. You don't have to do anything. On the flip side, you have people that like chat with a chat bot for like 5 seconds. Are like, this is stupid. It doesn't do anything useful. Um, and there's something to be learned, I think, from both sides there. Like, if we do choose kind of the lazy route and we just have 10 example Python challenges, and then we use that in the system prompt to generate challenges of any language, so like it will do it. It will generate a Go challenge if you ask it to, given a Python example, and it'll do like an okay job. But it does a way better job when you give it exact examples of what you want to see given a user input, right? So no, we're doing like basically every permutation of different type of challenge that you can generate in boot dev. We have a list of examples that we've handcrafted so that we get the highest quality results from it. And it's pretty tedious work, but I mean, if you want good performance, you gotta put in that work.
Yeah, and I think this kind of gets down to something I really believe, which is that, even with AI, expertise still does matter. It still makes a big difference. I think AI can make someone more efficient and more productive. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go from not having the ability to produce good content to now being able to produce world-class content. So it's a productivity improvement, but it's not. You have to have your own expertise there, and I think that's really important. And I think a lot of times people who I've seen through consulting with different companies struggle with is that sometimes it can feel like you don't know whether AI is performing badly because AI is bad at it, or AI is performing badly because you're holding it wrong. And this can be a challenge, I think, particularly sometimes with people with software engineering experience. If you think I'm going to create a to-do app to learn Go, you create a to-do app. You can go there. You can see, does it work or does it not work? Does it add to-dos? Does it store it in the database? If it doesn't, you did it wrong, because it's possible. If you go to decide to use Claude Code or Gemini CLI or Devon or whatever your tool of choice is to try and make a CLI, to try and make a to-do app, it'll probably make something. You might look at the code and say, wow, there's some really stupid try except blocks in here, or there's some really bad code, or why is it categorizing this in a way, or hey, there's all these edge cases that are going to break that I didn't catch in my test because I didn't think of it. And so the code can be really bad, but it'll still kind of work, And there's always, without spending a lot of time figuring out what's the right context, how can I make this work, it's really easy to think like, well, it just did it and it did it poorly, and that's the capabilities of AI. But my experience is, by really crafting the context in any context, whether it's, for the learning stuff that Lane is doing, whether it's for writing, whether it's for coding, if you spend time curating your context and making it, having really high quality examples of what you want and what you like, you get way better, way better results. And so that's great. So let's see. So it sounds like you've said basically that, one of the most important things, or the most important thing you've done, is spend time curating the right context, which can sound easy. It's easy to write it off as just a prompt. So when you mentioned that we talked briefly, we kind of mentioned tool calling. I don't actually know what you use tool calling for, even if you do use tool calling. I know that you've got a course on agent tool loop stuff, because I took it. I thought it was great. What's your experience been with tool calling, either as part of the product or just using it personally?
Yeah, I mean, tool calling is awesome. It's what makes anything agentic even work at all, right? I think I always get annoyed whenever I hear like on a business podcast or like a marketing podcast, people talk about agents. Like there are these crazy special things. It's like it's tool calls in a loop. It's a for loop and it's some tool calls. It's really the tool calls that are really, really cool.
And to
Um,
be honest, a tool call is just a prompt telling it, "Hey, here's a tool. You should tell me to call the function." It's like kind of the same thing, but
yeah, it's
another
just
topic.
structured output, right? Which is like structured output is still just an LLM, like that's just been really trained to give you the specific structure of JSON output. So yeah, it's cool how like you can build all this stuff on top of an LLM, but I mean it's tokens all the way down. Um, but yeah, so let me give you like a very specific case of where like we would not have been able to do something without adding tool calling. So a lot of students asked us like, okay, I chat with, so Boots is this AI bear wizard. He's the kind of coding mentor that you chat with when you're working on a lesson in boot dev. Um, and they'd be like, hey, why can't I just like ask Boots, how pricing works on the platform? So like maybe they're a free trial user. They've looked at the pricing page, but they didn't read the whole thing or whatever. Like, why can't I just ask the chatbot? Or why can't I ask the chatbot how streaks work on the platform or like quests, right? Because we have all these gamified we have all these game mechanics in the platform, and it takes a second to figure out how they all work. So why can't I just ask Boots? And the original answer was like, well, because we don't want to muddy the system prompt with just all this information about our pricing and game mechanics and stuff like that. It's going to make the prompt long. It's going to be expensive. Like every time you ask Boots, why does hello world work? There's going to be 4 paragraphs of text explaining our pricing and game mechanics in that context window that we're paying for. It's like tool calls solve that, right? Like anytime, like now the system prompt just has like one line. Hey, if the student asks about pricing, call this tool and we'll give you our whole pricing documentation, right? So now when a student asks about pricing, it calls that tool, it gets back like 5 pages of detailed markdown about how every conceivable bit of BootDev's pricing model could work. And now it can answer the question. But we're not taking that hit to our context window on every single conversation. So that's like the first use case we've had for tool calling.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this isn't something you said, but it's something that I'm going to preach about a little bit. Is that you use tool calls like this, and I think boot.dev has a very sophisticated chat bot compared to most products, I think, that help students learn. And what I'm hearing is that like you don't need tools for everything either. So for example, he talked about potentially pulling information from his SQL database and to augment the prompt, aggregating it, things like this, or pulling information about past students. So one way to solve this, and a way I see very commonly solved, is you put in the prompt and you give this agent 12 or 15 tools. It's like, cool, now I can just like call my SQL database for me and write my SQL prompts. And now I can, give it tools to look at the students' records and add that into the prompt. And you can keep adding tools. And that's one way to solve it. However, when you know what you want, if you know, hey, I'm going to want to query this particular table, this is the information that's very useful. It's still a useful thing to just write the code and say, I'm going to include this in the prompt. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off between sometimes you need tools and you need to do them. It's going to be the best. But it's also important, I think, to realize that, you don't need to reach for a tool to make your thing more agentic. There's a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of ways you can like combine these to make your bot smarter without always adding a tool for everything.
Well, you shouldn't so like one code. We need like a term for like an AI like code smell. Like one AI code smell would be if you're kind of chatbot. Let's just assume that, I don't know what you'd call like a specific system prompt type of chat, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it starts every conversation by calling the same tools, that's a problem. Like you did something bad there. You should just be calling those tools before the conversation starts, like you said, and condensing it into the system prompt. Because all you've really done at that point is open yourself up to the potential, one, for the chat to do the wrong thing and like not call those things that you wanted it to call. But you've also probably just made it slower. Like you're round tripping to the AI provider, on every tool call. And the end result is the exact same. You just get all this stuff into that first prompt. Um, so you really only want a tool if it's something that should only be used optionally, right? If it's used almost every time, yeah, just call it before the conversation starts. You'll be more performant. Um, it's simpler, bunch of good reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you dive in and you build these things and you learn a little bit about them and you learn how to use them properly, you start to realize that like there's a few simple patterns that can be pretty powerful. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way because there's a lot of big buzzwords that we like using in the AI space, especially because it helps things sell. But there's a lot of very simple concepts. So I got one more question. I don't know if anyone in the chat has any questions for you, but if you do, feel free to put them in. If we've got time, I'll ask. Otherwise, I'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the answers. Um, so we talked a little bit about boot.dev being a backend development learning platform. We talked a bit about, or a lot about how you're actually building stuff with AI and what actually matters versus what doesn't. But we also talked about like I'm building a context engineering and RAG course for your platform, and you already have a a course on building a coding agent, kind of like a Claude code clone. Like how do these fit into like backend development? These are kind of AI courses. How do you think about
Yeah.
that?
So when you look at how web development has evolved over like 25 years, the skills required to be a backend developer have not been static at all. Um, in like the very early days, I shouldn't say the very early days, like I don't know what was going on in the 90s. But like, in the early 2000s, you've got like, PHP servers, you've got Python Django apps like serving kind of full pages of HTML on every page load. Then you got like the switch to spas, and you got Kubernetes, and backend developers, maybe stopped working with interpreted languages as much. Now they're working maybe more with like a Go or a Java. Maybe they have to know a lot more about DevOps and cloud infrastructure. So like the skills required have been changing. Um, and I mean, I think it's core competency for backend developers in 2025 to be able to integrate with AI APIs and use them effectively. It's easy to integrate with an AI API. It's just an API, right? Like, yeah, there's some live streaming going on, so it's like there's tiny little challenges that are maybe a little more tricky than working with just a JSON API. But those little challenges are little, and like I'd expect you as a backend developer to be able to handle like streaming text messages across the internet, regardless. Um, but understanding how to engineer context well, right? I think is really important. A good example is we're building this new feature where we're generating challenges, and in like V0 of the product, one of the engineers on the team like dumped everything into context. Right. Now, granted, I told him to. This wasn't like him being dumb or something. It was like, let's start with like everything, and then we'll like figure out how to condense it down. Right. It was like everything. It was like 100,000 tokens about this user and like what they'd done. There was like a bunch of records where it was like listing every lesson on the platform and just saying they hadn't done it. Right. It's like the AI doesn't need to know every one of the 3,000 lessons on the platform, what its name is, description is, and whether or not they've done it, especially when it's all zeros. Right. So just figuring out how to, again, decide what to put in the system prompt, what not to, what to put into tool calls, like it's just core competency. So, we have the AI agent course. I'm sure we're going to make updates to the later parts of the backend developer curriculum that involve more and more AI agent use. It's kind of like Stripe. Like these days as a backend developer, unless you're working for a very, very large tech company, there's a good chance that for your payments, you're integrating with Stripe. For your mail, you're integrating with something like Mailgun or SendGrid. It's important to know how to use these tools, to know that they're there so you don't send your client down like some weird rabbit hole doing crazy, insane stuff. And I think the same is, it's the same for working with AI providers these days. Like it's just something that you need to know how to do as a backend developer. And there's very few companies in the world that you can work for that aren't doing something with AI at the moment. Like it's being shoehorned into the most insane places. We like to think that we're being sane about it, but every company thinks they're being sane about it. So uh, that's where we are.
Yeah, that's great. So I know I said one last question, but there's one last question. So if we talked about the product, so I guess in terms of developing these products or developing these AI features, whether it's actually AI features or non-AI features, just your core curriculum or um, your courses or new features, do like how much do you use AI tools, whether it's Claude Code or Cursor or Zed? I think I saw you say you liked Zed on Twitter once or something. Like how much do you use these tools? Like how much of a difference do you think it makes? Do you think you've gotten better at using them over time, or are they kind of like you just open them and it just works?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I do use Zed as my daily driver these days. They've kind of rebranded a little bit to the like AI editor thing. But they started as the real value prop for Zed was that it's fast. It feels kind of like the experience of like a VS Code. It's that type of editor layout, but it's not built on top of Chromium. So it's, written in like native code, super fast. So I loved it for that reason. Um, and yeah, it's got like a built-in agent. Frankly, don't use it. Haven't even tried it really because I use Claude Code on my terminal. Um, I don't know. I don't know why. I like using the terminal. Then it's got like integrated chat. So I go to chatgpt.com occasionally, but if I'm working on my code, I'm pretty much always using like the integrated chat. They have some sort of agentic chat that just bothers me every time it comes up. I close it and I'm like, I just want to chat. Like I just want text. Um, so I find myself mostly using it to tab a file into context and ask a question about the file, or tab a file into context, make very specific change. Um, Anytime I've tried to vibe code something more than like just like thinking from a product perspective, like a very specific instruction, it usually does something I didn't want to do and like makes changes that I'd be embarrassed to commit and have the rest of my team see. So like, it usually kind of works. That's usually what happens. It usually kind of works, but like I just never would have approached it that way. So I end up using it for a lot of like whenever I know that I have to change like 10 files, it's a kind of monotonous change. Like it's pretty good at refactoring in a specific way. Um, but there's a lot of vibes involved, frankly, in knowing like when you think it's gonna do a good job. And I'd say again, mostly use it just for chat, asking questions, or for like reformatting slash refactoring with a very specific instruction. Like it looks this way, I want it to look this way, go apply that to these 10 files. Um, that's probably been my main use case.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that kind of it all circles back around to like you need good instructions for these models to perform well, and you need to like know what a good outcome is, and you need uh, to have the expertise to know like this is what I want. Um, they aren't at the point, maybe someday we'll have these super intelligent AIs that replace us all, but until then, you know, um, having our own expertise and being able to augment them and knowing um, what kinds of tasks they're good for, what kind of tasks they're not, how to insert that context is great. I'm doing like a tool review series, and some of them I'm using like Open Hands, which is like an agent thing, and an AMP, and yeah, kind of the core thing that you'll see in those is as I do them, once the agent is done, and I've gone back and forth trying to give it instructions, and sometimes I try and vibe them, sometimes I don't. There's always a section where I look at the code and I'll show diffs of things that I didn't like that I change. I haven't gotten to the point where I can agentically do something and then just set and leave it. Maybe if you're creating like a static page where it's like just contact me and I want it pretty and that's all it does, I might not necessarily care about the code quality. But at boot.dev, they've got lessons and educational content and then user data, and that needs to be secure. So you definitely have workflows there. You can't. Yeah, I completely agree. You can't completely do that. So you mentioned you like using the terminal and you use a lot of Claude code, or use some Claude code at least. Have you used the terminal library called LLM? Simon Willison made it. It's a terminal thing where you got plugins for any provider that you want. You run it on the terminal. It's very much the Unix style. So you can do stuff like, I'm going to grab my git diff and pipe it into this LLM, and then pipe that into Glow, tell it to review it, or you can combine stuff in that way. I'm just curious if you've tried that.
That sounds interesting. I haven't tried it yet. I do also want to shout out, actually, I've recently started using open code. I know the guys who are working on it, Dax and Adam, and so far it's been really cool. Because Claude Code is very kind of attached to like the Claude and Anthropic ecosystem. It is nice to have more flexibility around like the models that you're using, and not have it tied to one specific company. But LLM sounds interesting. I mean, that's one of the things that's so cool about LLMs, like in general, is they're text based. And so the whole Unix philosophy of like, being savvy with a terminal, understanding standard in, standard out, how to pipe things, format things, like it's given, to be like cringy and, business influencer about it. Like it's given superpowers to people that know how to use the terminal well, because you're just piping text around. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I brought it up because I think you'd really like it. So from all I know about you, I think you'd really like the tool. And it's kind of cool because like in the background, it just logs, everything you're doing to a local SQLite database. And someday when you have free time, you can go poke around and see what you did. So it's a pretty cool one. So yeah, I'd love to look more in open code. If you're interested in like open source AI assisted development, either you, Lane, or anyone else. Yesterday, Eleanor did a talk on kind of a survey of a bunch of open source tools in the AI assisted coding space. And so that's a good way where you can learn more about open source. And part of the thing with it is to kind of avoid being locked into one ecosystem, which Lane mentioned. I just got an email that, my Claude Code limits are being limited on my subscription. So it's a nice thing to be able to avoid that if you can. But also you can look at the source code to see how these things work, to learn quite a bit. And so even if you don't choose to use an open source tool for your own AI assisted coding, which I think there are tools which you absolutely should use, like LLM, you can learn a lot by saying like, oh, well, how does like open hands, for example, that's just like Devon, it's a full agentic thing. And you want to see like, well, how does a real commercial thing work? You can go look at the code and learn. And there's quite a few open source tools like that. And so that's a great way to learn, experiment, get out of the vendor lock-in, all kinds of stuff. Okay, one question from the chat, and then we'll wrap up. Lane, are you no longer a fan of VS Code? Can you use Zed with VS Code, or are you just limited to GitHub Copilot?
Yeah, good question. I still think VS Code's fine. When I first started using VS Code, it was like 2015. I thought it was awesome because all my experience up to that point had been with like Visual Studio proper, which was like took 30 seconds to open. It was this like massive behemoth. So VS Code was like breath of fresh air. Took 2 or 3 seconds to open, felt really lightweight. I feel like over the years it's gotten really bloaty, and that's been kind of the life cycle. Is they've added more and more features into it. Obviously, it's built on top of Chromium. It's not as fast and snappy as it used to be. And the plugin ecosystem is massive. The pop-ups drive me crazy. Like every time I do anything, it's like, hey, install this thing and do this thing and whatever. So I just been like slowly kind of less and less satisfied with it. I still think it's totally fine. I have no like problems with it. But Zed is, first of all, the second part of the question, can you use Zed with VS Code? You wouldn't. They're basically competitor products. You know, Zed looks and feels a lot like a VS Code. It uses the same kind of layout of the editor, has a lot of the same kind of defaults. They do have like their own models for AI assistants that I haven't used. I just use like an Anthropic API key because you can bring your own key. So that's usually what I do. Um, I do use GitHub Copilot for inline assistance, but that works again in both. So that hasn't been a limiting factor. But the main reason I use Zed over VS Code has very little to do with AI and more to do with just it's a snappier, faster editor.
All right, perfect. So any last things you want to talk about before we wrap up, Lane?
Um,
We covered a
no,
lot of
unless
ground
there's
already, so
Yeah, not if there's no more questions from chat. I mean, I want to plug your course that's upcoming. You've got a RAG course coming out on boot dev, hopefully within the next, I don't want to make any promises, but 4 to 6 weeks, I don't know, something like that. It's getting really close. I'm super excited. Uh, and
and
yeah, so
you'll have a
check that out.
discount code to sign up for boot.dev in the email here. So yeah, keep an eye for that. Again, I
Absolutely.
get an inside scoop here.
Absolutely. It'll be a really exciting course. It's in Python. It's going to be a more advanced course, for people that are already familiar with Python. And so, like, if you don't yet know much about Python, there's some introductory courses you might want to take first, but it's going to be really, really awesome. I've actually learned a lot from it. I worked in the NLP space in a previous job, did a lot of work with just kind of text parsing and sentiment analysis on like live streams of tweets. So I actually was like vaguely familiar with a lot of stuff that Isaac's teaching in the course, but it was really cool to dig into a lot of stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, so definitely take a look for the discount code for that. Obviously, I've got the AI course coming up. You'll have a discount code for that. So take them both. If you're curious about information or content that's in either, like if you're not really sure if, say, the RAG course on boot.dev, if you're not sure if it's for you and you don't know if it's going to be too hard, too easy, what it's going to cover, feel free to reach out to me personally. You can go to isaacflath.com. There's a contact form. Feel free to ask me, anything you'd like, be as blunt as you'd like. Happy to answer any questions. DM me on Twitter. Just let me know. But I think they're both going to be great. All right. Well, I think that's about. Oh, there's one last question. Okay, is the new course going to be in the developer path or deeper learning?
Good question. To be decided. Not 1,000% sure yet.
You will have access to it if you sign up for boot.dev, though. That we are sure
That's
on.
true.
So
That is true.
that's the
Yeah.
most important thing. All right. So thank you, Lane. Thank you, chat. Thanks for coming. If any questions come up that you didn't think of during it, feel free to shoot me a message. I read them all. So I look forward to talking to you all soon. Thanks a bunch.